Let me make sure all mics are on. Yes, it
Yes,
looks like
please.
we are good. What is cracking? What's popping? What's shaking? This is episode 10 of the Comic Cinematic Universe. I am here along with, oh no, my co host is upside down. Hold on. Let me fix you, Grace.
No.
I feel like every time you turn your camera, it stays the same, so it may be flipped from the last time. So it's gonna be a quick adjustment, real
Okay.
fast. Hold on.
Is that on your end?
No, it's on your end. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Let me see. Flip it. Nope. I flipped it the other way. Hold on. Flip it again.
The disrespect is so
No,
real
this is
today.
this is you right here. This is you. Oh man, struggling. All right, here. I'm gonna turn it one time, and then I'm gonna turn it one time. There it is. Boom. All right.
Boom. We're back.
We
We're
are
here.
here, and again, this is episode 10. Grace, say what's up.
Hey, everybody. Super excited. We're always excited to be back with you guys, but today is like an even more special episode. We are taking it back to the beginning of this phase, WandaVision.
We can
Ugh.
we can technically say this is the start of phase 4. Yes.
Yes, WandaVision is what like launched phase four. And obviously this was pre CCU, so we didn't
Yeah.
get a chance to cover it. But we've been wanting to, it's been on our radar to visit, and this is like the perfect week. So super exciting episode for you guys. We have a lot to cover. Happy to be
Before,
back.
before we because I do have the WandaVision in the background. Before I switch to that screen, though, as you can see, everybody, like I mentioned in our last episode, I was moving and I have a whole new background. It is super naked, super bare, and all I have right now is I got my DVD collection of the whole MCU phase 1 through 3, plus a few of those bobbleheads. And if you can see in the corner, I got my Lego Infinity Gauntlet along with the Iron Man head. And I do want to, like, I didn't get a chance to. I've been super busy doing some production for this show this whole week, but I know it looks a little bare, but I am going to throw up what I am going to throw up eventually. I got a little
Ooh.
Infinity War poster that I'm gonna throw up there, and I got one more. Sorry, this I got to nerd out, y'all. I'm a little
You know
excited
something?
to.
I get it.
I'm a
I
little
get
excited to
it.
throw these up. So I got like an in-game magazine cover. So I am gonna have this on this wall by our next episode, episode 11. But I've been super busy, y'all. Like, listen, if you all haven't checked it out, actually, no, I'm sure you haven't checked it out. We actually launched a new Instagram. So if you go on your Instagram and you search the Comic Cinematic Universe as a whole, no spaces, you're gonna see clips from every single episode that we have had. Episodes 1 through 9 right now, but not 1 through 10, but episode 10 will go up shortly. I'm gonna try to post at least 3 clips per show, so check it out, follow, and
What we just so you guys know, like Chill and I have been like busting our asses to get all of this up in time for the
right.
10th episode.
Mm-hmm.
What a way to celebrate the double digits. You know, this is
Yeah, I like that. I
yeah.
like that a lot. Yeah, we decided to launch the Instagram. So a majority of what I'm going to be posting, say on my regular page, Chill from VA, is more so now going to be gaming and music. But from here on out, anything comic cinematic universe related is going to be on that page, from the promos to anything. So yeah, go ahead, check us out, and hit that follow button. And
Show us some love.
yeah, show us some love. So from here, we are going to switch screens real quick. We're going to go straight to what we're talking about today. Today, we are going to be talking about WandaVision. Okay, so this series as a whole, I'm going to take a second to kind of intro this, Grace, but
Do it. Take your time.
this series as a whole, say from jump, I I can say I may have been on the other side of the spectrum across from Grace because I only knew Wanda and Vision from what was seen in the MCU. And um, let's say before everything that came out from What If and all this and what we saw in the movies, like I saw like the love kind of budding, but then it was cut short in Infinity War. So say when this series was announced, I didn't know what to expect just because of what happened in Infinity War, because Vision died and Wanda was blipped. And then when Endgame comes, Wanda is back, and now we don't really get a feel for, or we don't really know how Wanda is feeling post Endgame. So I was interested, but I just didn't know. And in talking to Grace before, I know she had a little bit more of a background from the comic book series. So when she kind of told me what it was, and it wasn't really like comics per se, but these are graphic novels, correct?
Yes. So like and I'm like recalling that conversation that we had, I think like deep in the pandemic and lockdown.
Yeah, way before, like this
Yeah,
is like maybe a year ago, maybe like November, December, or maybe even January of this year, It's way back.
yeah. So they're like 1985, The Vision and the Scarlet Witch run is like the original comic books that I bought as an adult.
Hmm.
So I fell in love with these characters way back in Age of Ultron because I think like many of us, Wanda and the Vision, unless you really dove into the comics to some extent, or maybe dove really deep in some other content, like they're not really on your radar, like the same way that Iron Man or Hulk or
Right.
other characters that we had been exposed to prior were. So naturally, I had a big curiosity to just kind of look these guys up. And, just kind of like how you mentioned, you don't really see, like, you can see things where you can kind of superimpose now knowing their history.
Yeah.
Looking at Age of Ultron, where sparks were kind of being set up for what we're inevitably, end up seeing.
Yeah.
But initially you don't see that. So once I dove into just a little bit of the comics and I picked up that 1985 limited series, you are exposed to the greatest love story of our time.
Is it? Wow.
No,
Wow.
it's
Had
just
to hit
like
the Owen
it's
Wilson
so
wow on you just now.
it is just like it's like a star-crossed lovers type of story because in the 1985 run you see Wanda and Vision just trying, they're recently married,
Hmm.
they just left the West Coast Avengers and they're trying to basically just start their domestic life, right? They bought a house, they're trying to blend in with their neighbors. So very similar to what we see in the very first episode of WandaVision.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of different comic series that they definitely pulled as inspiration. The 1985, The Vision and the Scarlet Witch is one of them.
Hmm.
The Vision series that came out just maybe a few years ago, I think 2017, 2016, something like that, not
Hmm.
too long ago. That was a big inspiration as well. And also there's another one that I'm blanking, but I'll come back to that. But yes, so I dove deep into their comic history and I love the idea of like, they're just trying to be happy and then like the world just doesn't want it to happen,
Right.
right? They have kids, they realize the kids are actually just like manifestations of Mephisto, they get reabsorbed, Wanda goes crazy, Vision gets killed. It's like so out there. So back in Age of Ultron, when I was like, oh, this is never going to be adapted in like a movie or anything like that. So I was
Hmm.
like, it'd be so cool. And so that's why I agree. I am on like that other end of the spectrum. When I found out WandaVision was a thing, I flipped out. This is like that was like my Age of Ultron self, like sending a wish into the universe, and
Hmm.
then years later, it just like came true. So that's why this episode has been like been
So
waiting for this episode.
So before we even start, because I did throw up the actual comic book cover of Vision and the Scarlet Witch. Now, um, the first question I want to get out of the way just because once we talk about the topic of this question, I no longer want to talk about it, and that may be just today or going forward, and that's going to be about Mephisto. Now, when it comes down to uh, the comic book series, Mephisto was. Are you saying was like the puppet master, quote unquote?
Played like a very huge role in it, basically just breaking down the life that Vision and Wanda were trying to create for each
Okay,
other.
okay.
And yeah, yeah. So that's why,
That's why the
and I
internet
do
is just
love the
like
way
going off. Oh, it's
I
Mephisto.
I love the way you introduced this topic because I think ever since WandaVision, it's just been a running joke. And at this point, like I no longer expect Mephisto to come about,
Right.
but say since I had like a fairly decent understanding of the comics,
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely one of those people who were like theorizing like Mephisto, Mephisto, Mephisto. I This show gave me so much stress. I loved it,
Yeah.
but just watching it the first time around, waiting week over week for each episode,
Mm-hmm.
I was losing hair
Oh, I can
like on
imagine.
my line, just due to how much anxiety this show was
Right.
provoking. But yes, in the comics, he does play a role in like their story, definitely when it comes to like the twins and all of that.
Okay. All right. So now that we got Mephisto out of the way, okay, I want to dive into episode one. Now, when it comes down to no, I didn't mean to do that. So when it comes down to the title of episode one is filmed before a live studio audience. So with that being said, I remember seeing the commercials or trailers for WandaVision, and um, I was curious just to see that like this is almost like a TV show inside of a TV show, and they previewed how it's going to be in black and white. So initially, I was thinking, okay, so it's going to be on some borderline throwback kind of homage to like shows from the 50s and 60s, and uh, this one, episode one, it was reminiscent of, I don't want to say I Love Lucy, but it was maybe Bewitched or whatnot. And
Uh-huh.
oh, did
Mhm.
you have something to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, so the first episode that we see, I believe like the base inspiration for just the cinematography is the Dick Van Dyke Show. That's like
Oh,
the
Dick
main
Van
one.
Dyke.
But
Gotcha.
initially, because I wasn't familiar with that particular show, but I thought of, I Love Lucy as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
confirmed like I think in the last or second to last episode when we see those flashbacks
Yeah.
in yeah.
Okay. So say diving in first episode, episode one. I like the idea. This is one of the well, this episode just in general. This almost has kind of set the tone for me for what Marvel does at the very beginning of each series that they put out, which is it was almost like a slow start, you know. And I like I said, I didn't know what to expect. And of course, episode one is there shouldn't be all out mind bending action and this, that, and the third. But I was expecting just a little bit more than what we got. And initially, I guess before the show even aired, I didn't know it was going to be 30 minutes. So it was in actuality almost like a 30-minute sitcom. And I liked it for the fact that yes, we get to see Vision and Wanda kind of parade about, do silly things as a 50 show would do, but it left a question mark for me as far as like what is really going on, you know. And like the only way I can ask that is because of course we know Vision to be dead at this point, you know. So here I'm just like, what, like how is Vision here? uh, what is Wanda up to? And you can tell there was something wrong when uh, I can't I can't think of the actress's name, but I just know her as Kitty from that '70s show, and her husband is choking, and she's repeatedly saying stop it, but it's her face that it's like you can tell like she's like, stop it. Like she's smiling, but I don't know, it was something in her eyes to where I can feel something was off. It wasn't more so in what she was saying as far as the guy choking, but it just like you can tell that something was off in her mind when she was saying stop it. So this episode, it almost kind of set the tone of, okay, something strange is going on, something's weird, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what.
Yes, I think like initially, I mean, I think when we first saw the trailer for WandaVision, it set the tone that we're like, seeing a reality that was created by somebody, and I think a lot of us initially thought that was created by Mephisto.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're just kind of experiencing it together as like two victims essentially. We
Mm-hmm.
later find out that's not the case. And it's funny because you do get wrapped up in the sitcom elements of it, because really up until that moment when Mr. Hart is choking and then Mrs. Hart, Kitty,
Mm-hmm.
is like, it just doesn't make sense. Like he's choking, but to the point where he actually ends up collapsing because he's like
Right.
not breathing. So it's a serious moment, but she's smiling in this very uncomfortable way.
Right.
And just, that same scene that you were speaking of. And so that was the first moment where you almost get snapped out and you're like, oh, that's right. I should be asking a lot of questions. Like, first of all, Vision is dead. Like,
Right.
when did they get married?
Mm-hmm.
How did they come here? Like, what is this? Like, the first episode, really, it's like, and I think it gradually almost the sitcom element essentially like gradually dilutes up until we really get the last few episodes where we're really getting some answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, it's not really until this very last scene where we kind of jump out and realize, okay, we should be asking a lot of questions,
Right.
and we're really left with like we have no answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Because just from jump, my assumption in seeing this episode, I honestly thought Wanda somehow flew back to Wakanda, dug up Vision's body, and somehow brought him back to life. Because it doesn't look. It's not like he looks any different. Like he's actually here with the Mind Stone. Like he doesn't have a hole in his head from Thanos. He looks like Vision. So somehow I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking that she repaired him, maybe replaced it with like a replica stone just so she can have the
Yeah.
actual look of the Vision that she loves. So yeah, episode one, it was good. It was like I think I say this for every series that they come out. It was a good intro, leaving me with a lot of questions.
Yes, and I think this one more than any of the other
Right.
series we've seen since. And just kind of on that note that you mentioned, I feel like there's a lot of different characters in the series that almost play the role of the viewer in trying to decipher what the hell is going on.
Right.
So I think it's in I think it's the seventh episode where Darcy almost like says the exact thing that you said, like, oh, I just assumed, I think she says something along the lines of, I'm a, like a, what is the word? Basically like a science gal. So I just assumed you like she found you and turned it on switch, like the on switch,
Yeah.
to like revive Vision. And I was similar to that and thinking that was the case. It's definitely taking inspiration from House of M, where Wanda does create like her own reality in which basically all the dreams that she wants comes true, and that's what we're seeing.
Okay.
So that's episode one really sets that up.
I do have a couple images I want to pull up. Say, because right now, as we've been talking, I pulled up the image of Wanda in black and white that you've sent. She's at the dinner table of that dinner with his boss. But I do want to kind of get your thoughts because you also sent an image of. It says it's the giant size Avengers comic, and Wanda and Vision are like dead center with like it looks like the rest of the Avengers, like there's Thor in it, and then a few other people. Can you kind of tell us what this is about?
Yes. So, I believe the one that you're referring
It
to
says
that
like the long-awaited
display.
wedding, So I guess
Yes.
this
So
is the
this is
wedding. Yeah,
actually
yeah.
that's the comic in which Wanda and the Vision actually get married. So they get married alongside Mantis, and I forget the person that Mantis gets married to, but you can see them right there and
Yeah.
kind of off to the side of Wanda and Vision.
Right.
But it's like a double wedding. they get married, and then after this particular comic is where you segue into the 1985 The Vision and the Scarlet Witch. So I feel like it was very fitting to add it in here because they talk about like, oh, when did we get married, when did we do this. They the episode ends with them having their rings. And that black and white image, I think that, I don't know if it's still up, but the black and white image was just referring to that exact scene that we were just talking about.
Right.
Basically, where everything shifts for just a moment
Yeah.
and you get pulled and realize I should be asking a lot of things. And
Concerned.
then before it comes
Yeah.
right back, yeah, you should be
Mm-hmm.
concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And then it jumps right back into the sitcom vibe. So yeah, that's what that comic is all about.
Okay. And say towards the end of this episode, we do get credits, I guess, inside of credits here, and it's like the credits to the actual show. Now, I'm curious, just because I didn't really go into any backgrounds, but the names on this screen, are they any relation to the comic books at all?
That is such a good question, and I should have zoomed in.
Okay.
Like it makes sense that you would look into, because Marvel's so good at just weaving in very
Right.
little
Right.
intricate references. I know in the past they've even put like references to specific like comic book numbers on like plates in
Right.
like scenes, just little tidbits, and I'm sure there's like a tidbit in there. I
Okay.
just didn't look it
I
up.
was just curious because I
Um,
didn't know if they were like this like you sent it to me as like these were Easter eggs. So, like say there's like four names. I was like, oh, they may have been like some writers on the original like WandaVision comic book.
no, and this is just kind of like the zoom out at the very end, right? We've finished like it's kind of the end credits on
Yeah.
top of the end credit.
Yeah.
We're zooming out, and then we realize someone else is
Yeah.
watching this show with us. And initially, we, assume this is the big bad behind what's
Right.
going on. We, of course, realize that's not true. And the image, you can see a couple of symbols kind of pointing at Sword and the
Yeah.
organization. You do see it, I believe, in like the journal, and then somewhere on one of the opposite screens.
Yeah.
So again, leaving us with a lot of questions at the time. Now we do know that this is Darcy, Miss
Mm-hmm.
Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm sorry, Dr. Lewis.
Right.
So yeah, that's what that's all about.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the end of episode 1. Let's go ahead and dive into episode 2, where the title was "Don't Touch That Dial." And let's see. I did have some notes from episode 2, because one thing that episode 1 ended on, it was like, this is where we were just talking about the concern. Right now, there was a moment to where Wanda, towards more so the beginning of the episode, where she was talking to Vision, and she has said this line maybe 3 times throughout the whole series, which is, "This is our home." Now, when the way that she actually says this is, there, I'm referring to eyes a lot, but there's something in her eyes that was actually kind of scary, like, and Vision saw that, like, he was smiling, but then he was like, oh wait, like, he was concerned too. So that's when it's like it's starting to come together that something's going on, and Wanda knows something. We don't know if she knows the whole thing, but like the way she says it is, she almost says it a little scary, like, and I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I think Wanda may be in on the situation.
See, that's a really good catch, because I think I personally, watching it the first time,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I really was shifting into Wanda as a potential, um, I guess the person behind what's going on. I
Mm-hmm.
think my mind during this time was still like super honed in on Mephisto.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually the episode we get like a very solid concrete like Mephisto sighting. And I'm bringing this up obviously just as a more
Mm-hmm.
as a
Mm-hmm.
gag at this point,
Yeah.
because truthfully, it by the end of the show, and then when I watched it over again after I just kind of let my feelings marinate,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like, I don't know what's the word, like commemorable, what's the word, I think you guys know the word I'm trying to say,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost something that you can like respect, because it seems like Marvel and like Disney were basically like holding a carrot of like Mephisto, and then like us who are like very familiar with the comics are just kind of following that line and
Right.
like stressing out about it. And the first
Mm-hmm.
setting that, or the first indication that like people were like Mephisto was in the scene before things start to kind of get concerning, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
still very sitcom-y, and Dottie says the devil's in the details, Bev, and then Agnes says the line, "That's not the only place he is." So it was like the first like red flag where I'm like, ugh, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's Mephisto. I was obviously wrong, but it is kind of cool that the first like big flag to point to Mephisto, which is the big bad very often associated with their comics, is said by Agnes, right? Where she kind of alludes to like, so it was a little bit of a Easter egg of like, okay, this is who you should be looking at.
Speaking of Agnes, because I just threw up the picture of the comic version of Agnes. Did she go by Agnes in the comic book series?
No, so she goes by Agatha Harkness, which is how we were introduced to her in episode 8
Mm-hmm.
of WandaVision.
Right.
And based on like the one of the big things to point that she was, you know, Agnes all along
Mm-hmm.
is the pendant that she wears is very similar to what you see in the comics. You can actually see it in that picture that you pulled up.
Yeah.
So in the, I believe, I am not sure, I think you see it also in the first episode. I could be mistaken, but I know you see it very clearly in the second. You see a pendant that's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously the name just looks very similar as well. Agatha Harkness is a very influential character in Wanda and Vision storylines, but more specifically Wanda's.
Mm-hmm.
She plays basically like the role of the mentor throughout her comic run. So she's more of an ally than I would say an enemy. They do have some conflicts, confrontations, and certain like disagreements, but for the majority of the time, um, they're somewhat friends. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in this episode, there are a few things that started to like. We started to get a couple introductions. Like, say, the first would be quote unquote Geraldine, and
Geraldine.
this is who we find out later to be Monica Rambeau. And initially, when I watched this and the internet was set ablaze, like, oh, that's Monica, Monica, Monica. I didn't put two and two together that she was a little girl in in Captain Marvel. That was a slow uptake on me, but all in all, when it comes down to her, like I didn't know this was her initially because I was like, okay, there's a black woman named Geraldine. She seems cool, but also she seems a little off because when Wanda asked her what's her name, she had to take a second, and it's like, oh, Geraldine, you know, like, and
Yeah, there was
that was
hesitation. Mm-hmm.
that was another instance to where okay, something's going on, but one other thing that I saw was I want to talk about the drone for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because we mentioned the symbol that we saw in episode 1, which was of the sword, but then we see a drone kind of come into play, and this drone flies or lands more so into a bush, but it's in color. It's not in black and white with the rest of the show. So this is where things are kind of coming together, and it's like, okay, so now who is Sword? Who is this organization? And when I saw that, I automatically thought, okay, is this just Shield Reborn? You know, because I know Shield. There's no more Shield. It's just another organization to kind of take over now. Instead of a Shield, it's Sword. You know, so I thought that to be interesting when I saw that drone land in the bushes.
And I think I associate Sword very similar to Shield because it's like they have an objective, which is seemingly good, but they're run by people who are actually bad. And
Right.
so the Sword plays a very similar role as we saw Shield, you know, play earlier in the MCU. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fair observation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything?
Go ahead.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Sword or what you know of Sword from the comics?
I'm not too familiar with other things that they've been involved with. We do find out a little bit later in the run that Sword was founded by Maria Rambeau, which is Monica Rambeau's mother, which we see in Captain Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's as far as my like knowledge goes. But essentially, what my understanding is that it's an organization essentially founded to connect like things from outer space and Earth. Because if you think about episode, I think it's 4.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get there. 3 or 4, where Monica awakens about 2 weeks after just being barely like blips back.
Mm-hmm.
She's back at work and they're talking, travels, trying to get back into everything. And so it's all connected to just like, you know, friends, foes, and like threats of like outer space and things like that.
But say the idea of sword, say later on in the series, we'll talk about it later, like when Monica meets the gentleman running sword. I don't know why I thought of it, but I felt like when it came down to the organization, this is I thought it to be an organization trying to go by the ideals of Tony Stark, which is actually putting like a shield around the world, protecting it from anything outer space like, and say the director, I forgot his name, I wrote it down, but that's what he kind of explained it to be, because I think when he was talking to Monica later on, he was just saying, hey, there's like we're protecting this from everything from aliens and all this. So that's what I thought sword to be, and when I did the research after, I'm kind of going back and forth, but after seeing this drone and kind of doing some research for sword, that's what I thought it was initially.
I like the way that you say that because I think it's very fitting that you're bringing it back to Tony's vision of like, I want to, put an armor of like metal around the world.
Right.
Because, that's the first, that refers to Age of Ultron, which is the first movie we see Wanda from. And so I feel like that, I like the way that was said. It just like, it's so cohesive. Very, very chill of you.
We'll say, but because at this point, Endgame has already happened, and aliens have basically invaded the Earth twice, in Infinity War and in Endgame. So all in all, say if they didn't want to listen to Tony then, this is like now the government's version of, okay, now let's actually create an organization that actually incorporates a shield around the world to protect it from anything
Right, right.
extraterrestrial.
My understanding is that this was an organization that probably already existed, like maybe, alongside the existence of like a of Shield, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Sword, since it was founded by, well, I think in the show it's like set up that like Maria Rambeau founded the organization. I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming it was founded much earlier, like since she was active in like the same time that Captain Marvel was, which is like in the 90s or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely like I think predates like the events, but if anything, I think to tie in what you're saying, maybe after the two invasions that have since happened, now Sword is kind of being pushed more by the government to do those things and to protect the people. Because Hayward mentions in episode 3 about figuring out with like sentient weapons,
Right.
which is kind of a flag that he has something to do with like vision, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
really see that just yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your guess is pretty right. Like I think that's why Sword almost like got pulled up a little bit higher on our radar, and so yeah, I think that ties well.
Okay, and I'm curious just to see what direction you're gonna go on this next topic, because you sent me 2 images that you wanted to talk about together, and this is of the floating Sokovia and of Vision missing his stone. Can you?
Yeah, so this is actually for a reference from episode 1, so we're gonna backtrack just a little bit.
Okay.
But at the very start of the episode, Wanda and Vision both make little comments that seem very lighthearted, but they're actually kind of dark humor. I think Vision says something along the lines of like, "Oh, my wife and her flying saucers," which seems to be like a direct jab at Sokovia floating before its destruction in Age of Ultron.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says something along the lines of, let's see if I have the particular quote right
I
here.
remember it being that I just watched it yesterday, but I can't think.
Yeah, she says, "My
Yeah.
husband and his indestructible head," which is such dark humor referring to Vision at the end of Infinity War.
Mm-hmm.
So although it's like this, the first episode was very slow and very sitcom-y, very lighthearted,
Mm-hmm.
right in the beginning, it's like setting up that it's going to actually be discussing some really, really dark things that have happened and will continue to happen. But it's yeah, so I thought that was a really very interesting way that they kind of brought that about. So that was funny. That was fun.
It's funny that, I mean, if anything, it's funny that Wanda even mentioned that, or I would well, actually no, she didn't know. She couldn't know that vibranium isn't indestructible because she came back after Thanos destroyed Captain America's shield. So she wouldn't have guessed or known that. Oh no, she would have known. Never mind, just from what happened in Infinity War to Vision. So scratch everything that I just said. We're just gonna throw that out the window. So she actually did know that it is actually the opposite of indestructible. Is that destructible?
Yeah, so I think it was set up to be, I think it was set up just to be dark humor,
Yeah.
because we obviously know what did end up happening to
Yeah.
Vision,
Yeah. Yeah.
where, and so yeah, that was a really that I thought that was really dark. And I don't think I caught it the first time I watched it, but the
Yeah.
second time around that I was, or this part's probably like the third or fourth round I've
Oh, for
watched the whole
sure. Like
series.
it went over my
Um
head until you just mentioned it just now. So
yeah, so I thought
thank
that
you.
was a cool little, oh, you're welcome. That's why I'm here.
And the last image I want to pull up for this episode is it looks to be it's the comic book image of I guess of neighbors kind of meeting with Vision. It's like it says Wanda and I can use neighbors and understand our situation and we
So
certainly understand.
yes,
Yeah.
so this is directly pulled from the 1985 run that we were talking about. So it is connecting the comic book reference of like illusion and glimmer or glamour. I'm sorry.
Ah, got
Um,
you, got you, got you.
yeah, because in this episode, obviously there's a what's the word? A talent
Mm-hmm.
show. Vision and Wanda are like magicians, and they go by the name of Illusion and
Right.
Glamour. And these were actually friends of Wanda and Vision in the comics. And
Oh.
I think they're classified as mutants, but they use their mutant abilities to essentially have this very successful magic show. But they're also like thieves in the
Okay.
background, so that's kind of how they make their million. But they seem like great
Yeah.
people in the
Right.
comics, thievery or not. But that was a kind of a cool little jab at the comics. It just bring, although we don't see those characters emerge, it's a nice little reference to those characters from the one of the comics is obviously based off of.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. We're moving right along. We're gonna head over into episode 3, which is Now in Color. Now, when it comes down to Now in Color, episode 2, it ends uh, with them actually kind of transforming, or not transforming, but going from gray to color. Now, being that just from seeing that, I was kind of curious because I know uh, episode 1 is kind of based off of 50s television, episode 2 is 60s, and then episode 2 ends in color. So it just brought the question as far as when color TV actually came to play in real life. Did it actually come towards the end of the 60s and now we shift over into episode 3, which is now in the 70s? So that's one question that I had when I
Mm-hmm.
saw the end of episode 2.
I think it matches really well with like when realistically did like is this what's the word? Does this match up when color was actually like, present in TV
Right.
shows? So I believe this particular episode is based off of the Brady Bunch, which I think came out like in the late I think it was like 1969,
Mm-hmm.
so 70s
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And that, color, so that
Yeah.
tracks. So yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And say with episode 3, episode 3, Vision, he actually starts to catch on, and he starts to get a little suspicious. Initially, let's backtrack because at the towards the end of episode 2, we did see Sword kind of come up through a manhole, and then that scene almost kind of like erases and backtracks, and now like Wanda and Vision are just like back in their house. They don't even go outside now. Episode 3, I feel like there was an actual like another moment to where Vision he starts to like he's starting to put things together, and then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden it cuts to another scene to where it's like, oh, he just forgot, and then Wanda just basically erases the moment.
Yeah, and even more so, that's that end scene in episode 2 that you're referring to. It doesn't just rewind and then continue differently. Like Wanda says, no, and then just rewinds it. It's like this was, I think, the first solid moment in which you can tell that Wanda has some
Mm-hmm.
control in what's happening in this altered
Yeah.
reality. And almost to like a sinister way, because she says it just so like I don't even know the tone,
Right.
the eyes.
Hmm.
To your point, the tone, the eyes. It's almost sinister. She's like, no, and then just everything rewinds and it continues. So you know that she's aware of something. You don't really know what Vision is at this point. At this point you're assuming he knows
Hmm.
nothing because he's obviously like almost trying, and we see this very clearly in episode 3. You're right. Vision says something along the lines of like, I think there's something wrong here, Wanda, and
Right.
then that's where it jump cuts. The first time I saw this episode, I thought I did something wrong. I'm like, oh damn, like did I like press 15 seconds back?
Right.
Because
Right.
it was very jarring, and then it just continues and plays off very differently. So with the end of episode 2, and then how episode 3 unfolds, you have a very plain and clear awareness that Wanda is
Yeah.
controlling
Oh, definitely.
this
Hmm.
reality, and that Vision isn't
Right.
aware. Mm-hmm.
And this episode in particular, like something happens to where you 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 don't think uh, this event could happen, which is Wanda getting pregnant. Now, as far as that is concerned, we all know that Vision is a robot. He's an android. It is not physically possible, or maybe it is because as far as the pod that Ultron built him in, like he built Vision more so on a cellular level. So if it is possible, maybe if Marvel wanted to go that route, great. But they didn't, and it's like, okay, one moment she's not, and then the next moment the doctor says she's about like 4 months or something like that. So this is what is
Yeah.
getting a little weird, and I just posted up the image from the comic you sent, and it looks like Vision is just finding out that she's pregnant in the comic.
Yeah, so it gets weird, man. Like it gets weird. It's not much like it's a little different the way it comes about in the comics, but it's still weird in that it's like how does this logistically make sense? I think episode 2 in the very beginning there's like they allude to like some like romantic
Mm-hmm.
time, right? Because it's like they get woken up because of a sound and then they're about to go back to sleep, but Wanda's scared, so they make one bed, and then it like they allude to like the creation of a
Oh, some
child
love making,
essentially.
basically.
So it's kind of, yeah, no, honestly it kind of like it alludes to that, so it's like setting up the idea of like her getting pregnant, and then at the end of that episode when like all of a sudden she emerges with this baby bump. In the comics the way that it plays out is that there's this event where the Vision and Wanda are going up against this like witch society that killed Agatha Harkness, but Agatha Harkness ends up getting like resurrected
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so that's
Right.
okay. But she had to essentially like um, bring about enough power and energy to defeat this like clan of witches and like
Mm-hmm.
sorcerers, and it's in the process of conjuring up this much power that she's able to then conceive. Like I don't know if in that particular snippet that I sent you they almost have like a little bit of an explanation where Vision kind of like puts two and two together, like, oh, it's when this happened that you had the ability to then create this like this for us. So it's a really cute little snippet that I had sent you, the one that you're just playing
Yeah.
right now, where he's just kind of like bombarded. He's like, I'm gonna be a father. So very similar to actually how we see it in episode like 2 and 3, where they're both just trying to like figure it out. I think episode 3 is like sitcom like a line story is like them just trying to prepare for the baby. You see them like nesting. Vision is practicing. There's this really funny scene where he's practicing like how to
Breathing.
wrap a diaper, and he's like,
Oh,
time.
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot. I feel like if they're in the beginning, the ties that they drop in the comics are very light-hearted. They're much happier scenes, things like this, and then as it continues on, it just gets like it gets crazy.
One thing as far as kind of crazy is like say the doctor that was coming to help, like say he's all about taking a trip to I think the Bermuda Triangle. Now in that notion, the Bermuda Triangle is known to be a place to where people go missing, but yet he is going on a trip there for one, but then towards the end of the episode, he kind of gives the notion. He's like, "Oh, I'm not going because I can't. Like, it's like I can't escape, you know." So from right then and there, Vision, he's back to connecting the dots because it wasn't just him. We get a moment with Agnes and the other neighbor that somehow like Buzz saw like a brick wall. But like all in all, like he's suspicious of those people because they're talking about Geraldine. He doesn't know what they're talking about. He sees that something's funny, and then by the time the episode ends, he comes back in and Geraldine's missing. I know I'm kind of like fast forwarding through like the whole show, but I did want to kind of go back into the notion of like, say, the beginning of the episode, Vision is starting to put things together and Wanda erases it. But then back towards the end of the episode, Vision is again putting things together, seeing that something's off.
Yeah. Again, I feel like Vision is playing the role of like the viewer, right? He's asking the questions that we're kind of asking at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and just kind of addressing the odd behavior of the other citizens of the town. The doctor, that one guy that like just cut down the wall, and then when Vision like addresses it, he's just kind of like, yeah, but like does nothing
Right.
about it. And there's like a that in that same scene where he's talking to Agnes and that same guy. They're discussing how, you know, Geraldine, like she doesn't have a home, she doesn't have a husband, she doesn't have, so it's already also outlining that, you know, Geraldine mesh with this reality that has
Right.
been created by Wanda.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know, we get that scene, which is I think the first reference to the MCU events outside of the dome, which is
Ultron.
Wanda's brother Pietro,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, and then Geraldine, Monica making the comment of like, right, he was killed by Ultron, and that snaps Wanda into a like how like almost like radar of like you don't belong here, and then
Right.
she's just gone, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't see it just yet, but we're obviously going to see it at the end of I think episode 4,
Mm-hmm.
where you know, Wanda ends up actually pushing her through the town and out of that dome reality that she's created,
Yeah.
basically just exterminating her from the reality that she's molding because it just doesn't fit.
Right.
And then that's when Vision kind of segues way in, and the episode ends seemingly happy. So it's like a
Yeah.
constant back and
Seemingly.
forth. Yeah, yeah.
But this episode, it does. Is it this one, or I guess it may be when they bring this scene back up in the other episode. Is this the episode to where we see Zombie Vision or no? Not Zombie Vision,
No,
but
so
Vision
we
as
see
like Geraldine. Yeah.
yeah, so we see that in I believe it's the following episode. Let me see.
Actually, it is. I
Yeah,
wrote it
so
down.
it's in
I'm
episode
stupid.
4. Yeah. No, it's okay. It's the same scene that episode 4 essentially like jumps back to, but now with a different perspective of what actually happened to Geraldine,
Mm-hmm.
because initially we don't see that Wanda had thrown her out of Westview. You just see that she's no longer there, and she
Right.
says, "Oh, she had to go home," you
Mm-hmm.
know? So yes.
And lastly, before we actually get into episode 4, I think you had a reference to um, Doctor Strange, and like you sent out a comic book image of him with Wanda and Vision. Kind of tell me what this one's all about.
So fun fact, we do see Wanda's OBGYN in this particular episode. And so fun fact is that in the comics, Doctor Strange plays the role of her OBGYN, which makes sense because who else would be able or capable to care for this strange and miraculous
You know what? That's just wild. Just because,
conception?
like, I don't think of him as a doctor anymore. You know, I just think of him as a quote unquote master of the mystic arts, and I totally forgot that he is an actual doctor.
Physician, yeah, it's really honestly it's very
Right.
comical to think him being her OBGYN, but it also makes sense because who else would understand enough to be able to be like, oh yeah, like you're fine, you're healthy, all of that. So I thought that was really funny. So I wanted to make sure to share that with you guys for those of you who didn't know. Like
Gotcha.
I said, like the first comic I ever really read as an adult was that 1985 run. So when I first watched the show, I was like, oh, this and this and this. Like my partner was so annoyed because I just kept pausing and
Yeah.
pausing like the show and be like, oh my God, did you know? And then like just continue on. So I just wanted to make sure to share that with you guys, all the little tidbits.
Gotcha. And moving on to episode four, it's the title is "We Interrupt This Program," and I could have just posted this image just now, but and talking about episode three, but now here is the image of Vision with his stone missing, and this is where it gets super eerie, and I feel like when I saw this in the show, I was like, okay, so my suspicions were correct from episode one. She went all the way to Wakanda, dug him up, brought him back, and she just had a quick glimpse like of what he actually is. But then like she like blinked her eyes and then he was back to normal, you know. So
Yeah.
from here I was like, all right, so this is basically a zombie Vision.
Yeah, so that's kind of what people assumed. That's what I assumed at the very beginning. So then I think that at the end of episode four, this episode, when we get that shot, it kind of confirms for us, okay, like she somehow found Vision's body,
Mm-hmm.
reanimated it, used it in this reality to essentially play like puppet master in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode is really the first episode that starts to give us some answers, right? Because this episode starts off with Monica waking up in the hospital. She's just been blipped,
Yeah.
and it
And can
gives
I
us
can I
this.
stop you right here?
Mhm.
Just because in that instance, I feel like that may have made this episode maybe top one or number two, or at least top three episodes because I wanted to see something come from the blip, you know, and in the MCU, we see all the instances of like the people coming back from Endgame, the people coming back from it wasn't Spider-Man Homecoming, it was Spider-Man, or was it Homecoming?
Far from
Far
home.
from
Far
home,
from home.
right, right. And
Mhm.
now we get another instance of people coming back from the blip. So at the end of the day, this may be the last reference to the blip that we get because I feel like we're all blipped out. But I'm glad that they added it to this series.
And by that, do you mean the last reference to the blip in this series, or thus far? Is that what you're
Thus
asking?
far, as far as actually seeing images of people coming back from the blip.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I mean, I believe, have references of it in
Right,
I think
right. I'm
every
not talking
project
about
since
just
then, but
like
it's the
verbal,
last
like
time we've seen
yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And what a way to kind of get a final understanding of not, we didn't really get that when we saw Endgame. When we saw Endgame, it was birds chirping, there was
Right.
like a warmth in the air, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone is happy. And this gives us the perspective and understanding that it was not the case for everybody.
Right.
For the most part, honestly, the blip seemed to be just as chaotic, if not even more so, than when everyone initially disappeared. So that's how this episode starts off. It's really, in comparison to the first three, where everything was fairly slow paced,
Mm-hmm.
we're mostly just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. This episode, in contrast, shined for sure. So definitely one of the top three, if not like one, like maybe top one for me or two. So yeah.
I think that like now that you mentioned it, like when you said like birds chirping, I think in that moment I wasn't thinking of chaos. I was more so thinking I was like Hawkeye got to talk to his wife. Like this is like such a happy
Yes.
moment, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You can't imagine the craziness that's going on for the rest of the universe. Like I was gonna say the Earth, but like the rest of the universe, you know. So
Yes. Yes.
it's kind of wild, and like this episode, it definitely like highlighted. It's not always a happy ending because Monica, she's in the hospital. She meets up with her doctor or not, or her mom's doctor. Come to find out that her mom passed 3 years previous, but then it was actually 2 years after that, after she disappeared. So that's when you like it hits Monica that she's been gone for 5 years total. You know.
Yes. And so I feel like this sets up this episode itself, I feel like sets up the tone for the rest of this stage because, every project since then, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Shang-Chi, Eternals, I know mentions it, has some type of reference to what happened with the blip, right?
Right.
And I think the majority of the things we're seeing from this like stage so far is that a lot of bad things kind of came about it.
Mm-hmm.
In the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you see just how much kind of like injustice all throughout. Like the system is so broken because it's just like it's not taking into consideration the people who are coming back, people who have always been here, and there's like just so much conflict. So I feel like this episode really sets the stage for everything else we see blip related
Yeah.
for this stage for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty big.
What else did I have? I also enter Agent Wu.
I almost want to go. I want to show you my notes. Wrote that word for word. Enter Jimmy Woo.
Right, right, and this is where I know the because for me this hasn't been a comedy. This has more so been like a mystery as far as
Yeah.
episodes 1 through 3 up until this point. But now with Jimmy Woo, I know there's going to be a comedic aspect to the remainder of the show, and I wasn't expecting to see him here when he pops up, like when Monica just drives up to the Hex and then he's there. I was like, okay, cool. We already got a feel for him and his comedy in Ant-Man 2, and how he is low-key like has a hobby of doing magic, and now he's over here later on in the series like breaking out of like handcuffs and actually doing magic tricks, because he was kind of trash in Ant-Man, but now it's like he's kind of like perfected his magician skills, you know?
No, well, it's in Ant-Man and the Wasp where he has like an initial like he's very intrigued because Scott Lang can do magic. He's like,
Right.
how the hell did you do that? And so like the way he's introduced in this episode, he like brings out his card in the same way that Scott Lang did a trick in Ant-Man, and he's like, and so it's really cool to see that like in these 5 years he's been able to perfect
Right.
this little trick. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really cool. And so before we kind of get into obviously the conflict of this episode, which is just really discovering what about Westview, the fact that people near the area have absolutely no recollection of it, even when standing in front of a sign that says Westview.
Mm-hmm.
But before we dive in there, I wanted to just pull back a little bit. And so I'm referring to the scene where Monica, it's been 2 weeks now since she's been blipped. She's coming back to work, which is crazy. She's obviously trying to somehow push back the grief that she's feeling for having lost her mom by just diving into work. But they're referring to the astronaut training program, the program that she kind of wants to just like, continue where they left off from. And so Haywood mentions a lot of different things. So he mentions like robotics, nanotech, sentient weapons. And I put that like in like very red mark because that's a really like red flag pointing to his, his having had the possession of vision, AIs, observation and response. Not creation, which is like a thing that Monica kind of points out. And then, right, threats and allies. So this is like a reference directly to Captain Marvel when she says, I think Haywood mentioned something like, oh, like the universe is filled with, or like with threats or something, kind of referring to what you were mentioning about.
I think that was Monica, and then she says, and allies. Like, I think that was her that
So
said it.
Haywood says something about like, oh, the universe is filled with threats, and then she cuts him and says, and allies. So referring to obviously her events in Captain Marvel.
Right.
She obviously befriended extraterrestrials. I think the Skrulls. Yeah, Skrulls. So I thought it was really cool because obviously by this point you should know that this is a reference to Captain Marvel because we've seen not just a Monica Rambeau but Maria Rambeau. We passed by a picture of Monica. We even see like a little bit of a reference of what Monica Rambeau's alias in the comics is, which is Photon. That's one of her comics, and you see that on the picture. So that was a cool reference. Nice little callback to Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
And now hopping back to the town, Jimmy Woo, continue.
Oh, I think that's all that I had. And I think that when Jimmy, like, because initially I think it was episode 2, we see Wanda in black and white, and she's at a gathering, and at this gathering there is like a FM radio, and we hear a voice calling out to Wanda, asking like who's doing this to you, right? And then episode 4, we find out that it's Wu and what's the girl's name again? Dar.
Um, Darcy Lewis.
Yeah, Darcy, right?
Mhm.
It's actually them trying to reach out to Wanda, and because this work it kind of ties up to where we actually do find out that it is Darcy with the Sword Journal watching the TV, and yeah, we find out that it's Jimmy trying to reach out to Wanda just to get some type of connection inside the hex.
Yes, and then this is also where we find out that the bumblebee, what is it called? The beekeeper,
Right,
the beekeeper coming out of the sewer earlier in episode, I think it was episode 2 or 3,
right.
is actually also a sword agent who was just trying to get through to the hex to figure out
Yeah.
what's going on and was like transformed,
Mm-hmm.
much like any object that goes through the hex. And then we also see that the drone that we saw earlier is actually one of the drones that they were trying to kind of get information with. So this answered a lot of the questions we were kind of wondering up
Right.
to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this highlights especially Darcy and Jimmy's role of being the audience,
Mm-hmm.
and right, because they're watching the show just as much as we are trying to piece everything together,
Mm-hmm.
like, and there's a specific scene where there's like a board, and honestly, like this, you could you could compare that to like the notes I had back then, and
Mm-hmm.
I like almost all the questions on there were on my notes, like what is real, who are these people, like
Right.
they have a whole, like, so they're going through it with us, but they actually have the answers. I like the way that this episode was laid out.
Mm-hmm.
um and
Oh, can I
initially they
reference that
also
board
go
real
ahead.
quick?
Yeah,
Just
go ahead.
because on that board in watching it again yesterday, I realized, um, say my girl she brought up the question is Agnes on the board, and like as the show progresses, you actually see her on there. So we now know. Well, first we don't know who Agnes is, but we know that she is a I don't want to say member, but she is a resident of Westview. Like she didn't place herself there just because of what Wanda's doing. She was already there before Wanda even got there.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a pretty good catch, because I think rewatching, that's something I actually kind of missed, and
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the questions I was still kind of pondering myself. I assumed that it was that it was actually like Wanda's creation of, the hex and everything that drew
Mm-hmm.
her into it,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm happy that you answered that, because I was under the wrong assumption. So thank you.
Yeah, no
Thank you.
worries.
Who was the one who asked that question?
Yadira.
Oh,
All right, so episode
oh,
five.
that was so good.
What is it? It's called on a very special. I think is it called on a very special episode? But anywho, you sent all of the images that we got at the very intro of Vision. We get baby Vision, we get kid Vision, and we also get dad Vision, a sad dad Vision holding the twins. So. Uh,
This is my favorite intro of all of the intros we've gotten, because it's the funniest. Like, I just wanted to make sure all of you guys watching just got a second look of these images, because they are just hilarious to see. Because obviously we met Vision, he was born a man,
right,
grown.
right.
So I thought these were really hilarious, and I just wanted to highlight them. There's no like further reference than that. I just thought it'd be really cool to show them on screen for everybody.
But I do want to talk about, just because, say, from this image of Dad Vision holding the twins, you also sent a comic book image of, I guess, the twins being born here. So let's chat
Mm-hmm.
about that for a sec.
Yeah, so a lot of these scenes, like I said, especially earlier in the episodes, like 1 through 3, even this one, I feel like have a lot of tie-ins with like the 1980s run of the Vision and the Scarlet Witch.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot more lighthearted. It's kind of right before, not nice events happen. I think that run actually ends with the birth of the twins.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure to display that image, because it's another really direct reference from what we've seen in the
And
comics.
now looking at it, I can now see it's Doctor Strange giving birth,
It's
or
Doctor
helping her give
Strange.
birth to these twins. But there is also another comic reference to where it looks like Agatha, now that the twins are born, she is concerned with who or what the twins are.
Yeah, so this is kind of a reference because in this particular episode we do see Agatha. She is like babysitting the twins,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another reference to the comics because she does do that in there as well. And I was gonna pull something up. Let's see. Yeah, so it was the main pull on that. And something I wanted to point out in reference to the twins is this is where we start to see that, unlike, everything else in Westview, the twins are actually not exactly in Wanda's control, right? So she's trying to console them. She's trying to put them asleep with her power. She's like, you know what? Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Right.
She tries, it
Right.
doesn't work. So this is a very clear, just displaying that when they're not under her spell, but it also highlights that she is very much running the show for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even further highlighted by that same scene where Agatha is or Agnes is trying to, help out and babysit the kids. And there's like a line that she says, she's like, oh, do you want me to take that from the top? Like very much breaking
Yeah.
what's from breaking the fourth wall. And so it just highlights even more that she is very well aware of the situation. She is running the show, like so much so that they have like it alludes to the fact that they have lines, so like direct,
Right.
like these are so. And also, and with this particular episode, I'm gonna put it over here. Um, let me. All my notes are all over the place. Let's see. This is also an episode where Vision like directly confronts Wanda with what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and he is starting to get the sensation that she does know more than she's letting on to,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where the gaslighting begins.
Right.
I think that it's in this run of watching it, I was able to kind of comprehend why this was so bothersome for me. Obviously, like they have a love story in the MCU in the comics. So it was very hard to see like Wanda play the role of like the abusive
Mm-hmm.
partner because she very much does it. Like he's trying to confront her with what's going on because she's, for love or for whatever other reason, like she is mind controlling
Correct.
everybody. Um,
Because this is
she's aware
this
of
is
it
the
at this
episode to
point.
where Vision is in the office and he kind of unlocks his coworker's mind just for a second, and like he the coworkers just like stop her or like help. He's freaking
Oh,
out,
it's
right? And then
terrifying.
all of a sudden,
Yeah.
Vision just kind of switches him back into Wanda mode, and as far as that actor, I feel like that was just a great kind of like going from crazy to, oh hey, about this email. I was like, oh, that's just actually like he did a good job. I don't know the actor's name, but he
Props.
played that role real well.
That was good. No, that was good. And so this is kind of the episode where things are kind of tipping over, where like there is much less sitcom-y and you're starting to really get a feel of what's going on. And I think that's enhanced by the fact that the boys aren't under her like manipulation, because this is where we see obviously Billy and Tommy, they're kind of aging like, you know,
Yeah.
quickly, right? They can kind of control that ability in the within the
Mm-hmm.
hex. And they're like, oh, where is dad? And then she says like, oh, he's at work. And they're like, oh, it's Saturday. I mean, it's Saturday. And she's like, no, it's Monday. Like just full on
Right, right. It's
gaslighting, like
just
trying
like,
to
what
manipulate
are you
even the
saying?
kids.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and they're like not having it. They're like not buying it. They're like, this doesn't make sense. And she's like, oh, daddy needed a distraction. Because obviously Vision was starting to ask too many questions. He was trying to like figure it out. And so this episode really kind of has, it's a very heated episode for
Oh,
sure. And it
definitely.
breaks my heart seeing these two like get at
Right.
it. It was really and also I think another big thing that happens in this episode, direct link to a comic run. I think it's The Vision. I forget what year it came out of, but it's actually a very recent comic. And I'm referring to their dog.
Mm-hmm.
Right, this is the episode where the boys find a dog and they're like, "Mom, can I keep it?" It's a very classic kind of like sitcom
I
storyline.
was just about to bring this
And
up just because I wanted to know where this was gonna go, where like these
oh,
two
I bet you
images were gonna
did.
go. Yeah.
So this is just kind of adding to that point that this is really the turn where you see a lot less of the happy sitcom
Mm-hmm.
feel, kind of like the 80s run of like their comics, and we're shifting into some darker topics. So this is a direct reference to that particular comic run, The Vision, in which the Vision is basically has created his own family of androids. And he's just trying to find happiness and love, but it's like it's just not happening for
Yeah.
him. And so Sparky, the one that we see in this particular episode, is referencing the dog by the same name in his comic run. The way that he's kind of brought up in the comics is there's this dog that there's this dog that unveils the Grim Reaper. So the Grim Reaper in the comics is Wonder Man's brother, and Wonder Man is the individual whose brainwaves were used to make the
Okay.
Vision. So that's obviously something that's not referenced in the MCU. In the MCU, the Vision's created like in a whole different
Correct.
way. But anyways, so the Grim Reaper is buried. He's been killed by Vision's android wife, who just keeps killing people in the series.
Right.
So the dog like uncovers him. He gets like electrocuted, and then he dies. And so then Vision is like, oh no, like I can't, like I gotta fix this. So and that's kind of like the clips I pulled for you. He's like taken the dog's brain out. He puts it into this android body, and voila, you get Sparky the dog. And now the family has an android dog to match. So later in this particular episode, we also see Agatha. She killed Sparky.
But we didn't know that until like
We didn't know
later.
that just
Right.
yet, but it's
Right.
like it's all very tied in terms of just like I feel anytime someone kills a dog, like bottom line, like that's dark.
Yeah.
That's dark. Yeah.
But we do actually get like the way this episode ends because, like you said, they're starting to get heated, and it's like one of those conversations that couples kind of go through. It's just like you can feel the tension. You're just like, it's like they're not vibing
It's like a
right
little
now,
too real.
But then like just to kind of cut that tension like butter out of nowhere. Doorbell rings, and Vision's just like, "Are you doing this?" She's like, "No," and out of nowhere we get Evan Peters, aka Quicksilver, and by that I mean aka Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men universe, and that was totally unexpected. Of course, I was thinking that we were going to get the other actor who played Quicksilver in Age of Ultron, but now by this point, people are freaking out online like, mutants are here, mutants are coming, and all of a sudden we
Yeah.
get the mutant quote unquote version of Quicksilver ringing the doorbell.
This was a huge moment. And I was definitely one of those people that were freaking out. Like, okay, this is the introduction of the mutants, because obviously by this point it was known that, Marvel now has the ability to like adapt all of these characters, use the term mutants. And it's very fitting that in this episode that we get introduced to this, in this, they call him Pietro in the MCU. So Pietro, this version of Pietro, we also get this really juicy scene a little earlier in that particular episode where I think it's Haywood and Monica who are trying to make contact with Wanda. They send in like an older version of like a drone, but Monica didn't know that it was actually
Mm-hmm.
armed. Cut to the scene that then Wanda's dragging this like drone out, and like basically you drop this.
Right.
And then as that scene progresses, we get this really cool scene that reflects very closely to a very well-known mutant's MO. Wanda like does this, and now all the guns are like pointed at Haywood, and I feel like this parallels a lot of scenes that we've seen from Magneto, which we all know is Wanda's father in the
Correct.
comics. We don't that doesn't seem to be something they're gonna at this point adapt
Right.
in the MCU. They might still actually,
Hey,
and I'll
multiverse,
have
you
some
never
theories on
know.
that.
You never know.
I don't know. And honestly, something, even without the idea of the multiverse, so in the comics, like Wanda was raised by like she has like adoptive
Mm-hmm.
parents. So she does not find out that she's the daughter of Magneto until much deeper into her years. So very similar to here. So who knows, like maybe Magneto's gonna hop out within the same universe and be like, actually, like the people you thought were your parents who died weren't, and I'm your dad all along. So that's still something they can do without the need to bring in the
Right.
multiverse. So they have a lot of different ways to bring that about. And I think that would just be really cool. That would be a really good segue into like the X-Men, Magneto, all the other things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really nice, neat that it was introduced in the same episode that we see Pietro come
Yeah.
up.
Okay. So now we're in episode 6, the all noon Halloween spooktacular, and this is like this episode. Like Evan Peters there, he's playing with the kids, but the tension is still super thick between Wanda and Vision. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
just watching that scene, and Vision's just like, all right, headed out, and she's like, but you're supposed to, and he's like, what? Like, I'm supposed to what? You know? I was like, man, that's like I'm
Mom
uncomfortable
and dad are
watching it. You
fighting
know?
again. It's tough to see that because like the way we've seen them in previous projects is like they're in love, previous to WandaVision, the MCU, the most what would I say, like the most updated MCU like image I have of them is like just about to plan their lives together, and then all of a sudden like Vision just gets stabbed through
Mm-hmm.
the chest,
Yeah.
in Infinity War. So it's hard seeing these characters argue. This particular episode starts off with they're all getting ready for Halloween. Super cool that their Halloween costumes are a like direct homage to the costumes that they wear in the
Mm-hmm.
comics typically. And I did love how they had like different explanations for the comics. Like I think like, oh mom, what are you for Halloween? And she's like, oh, I'm a what'd she say
I
she was?
forgot
Did
what
she say
she
like
said, but
a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sokovian, something like
Right.
that, fortune teller? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was. And then Visions he makes a comment like, oh, I know how much you like wrestlers or Mexican wrestlers. So I thought that was funny that they paid homage to their classic
Mm-hmm.
costumes, but they like explained it differently, which is kind of cool. So
Yeah, I thought so. And say one note that I made as far as episode 6, because I do want to talk about the Halloween just in general, but outside of the hex, uh, we get a moment to where Hayward, he's not really vibing with Wu, Monica, and Darcy, so he kind of sends them off outside of the camp, right? And
yes.
Monica and Wu start fighting the sword agents, and in my head I was like, oh, oh shit, like Jimmy Woo's actually kind of a badass, you know? I would have thought him to be soft because of all of the comical jokes that he's had thus far in the MCU, but like him and Monica while Darcy watched him just like take out like 2 or 3 agents. I was like, okay, all right, props, man. You can actually get down if we need you. Like,
Hold your
right,
own.
exactly. You
Yeah.
know.
And I don't know if this is just like fan like, theory. I don't know if you know, but I know that I heard talk about him getting his own TV show. I don't know if that was
Oh,
just
I
wishful
haven't heard that
thinking
yet.
or if that's something that's confirmed. But let me just say, like, along with WandaVision setting up the theme on many different things like the effect of the blip and just like the tone of this new phase, it also introduced like the theme of just really strong secondary
Mm-hmm.
characters of this phase. Like we've talked about Yelena Belova, we've talked about what's her name from what's her name in old Shang-Chi, you know who I'm
Right.
talking about, Aquafina's character. So I think Jimmy Woo and Darcy definitely fall into that for sure. Those were like very fun
Right.
characters in this. They have that they're just the characters that we
Mm-hmm.
love. You protect these characters, and they're just like add to the comedic effect of the show
Correct.
for sure.
Correct. What else? What else did I have for? Oh, so there was a moment to where Darcy, she hacked into Hayward's system and sees that Hayward's computer is tracking the decay of vibranium, and
Mm-hmm.
when she said that, it still kind of solidified the fact, or solidified the notion of Wanda kind of reanimating Vision, you know.
Yes,
I'm
I agree.
like,
Hmm.
okay, so the computer's actually tracking the vibranium, so it's not a fake vision. This is actually a real vibranium based vision. So this is the real vision, you know? So later on,
Hmm.
we find out that he isn't, but it it then in watching this again, it kind of sparked something in my mind. It's like, oh, if anything, Wanda can manifest vibranium at will if she needs to be. You know, she can manifest anything, even if it's like the hardest material on Earth. She can just create it with her powers, and boom, here it is. And Vision just happened to be that example of that.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's no real limits to what she can do. So, like, I think that tracks. I agree. When we first heard that, I feel like it just further confirmed what we thought was a confirmation, and that she just kind of reanimated his
Mm-hmm.
body. You know, and I forget if it was in this episode. I think it's the episode where we see, yeah, Monica come out of the hex
Mm-hmm.
initially, that Hayward pulls out some video footage of Wanda out of context, where it makes it look like she busted into
Right.
the, you know, a sword
And took him.
facility and took Vision, which is not the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? He kind of like juxtaposed these clips to make it seem that way. And so as of now, this is what we think has occurred. We're obviously wrong. But Haywood knows that right now, right? Because he has the real
Right.
Vision at this point.
Right.
So he's obviously kind of like tracking the Vision within the hex to kind of, I think, one, to figure out how is Wanda doing
Correct.
this, much like we're all
Mm-hmm.
wondering, and then two, just keeping tabs on him, because he obviously seems to be still an independent body, right? He's not under the same influence that the other citizens of Westview are, because he's obviously questioning a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things. That's why he's not really in this episode with Wanda, more so on like the outskirts of the city, with
Correct.
Darcy trying to, yeah, make his way over. So or I'm sorry, not with Darcy just yet, but yeah. So and this also along those lines with let me see, had it pulled up. No, actually going into this episode with the fake Pietro,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fietro,
Let's call him
right?
that. I like it.
Um this I stole it. Agatha Agnes coined it. So we see that Pietro's trying to kind of probe Wanda and to figure out like how is she doing
Right.
this? Like, he's kind of trying to get those answers by first like rubbing her ego or like soothing her
Mm-hmm.
conscious, because obviously like she's hijacked all of these people's lives. Like
Correct.
they have families, they had jobs. In the previous episode we saw just how terrifying this experience is for the people of Westview, and she's aware of it, but she continues because this is the only way she can see to have all the things she's ever wanted,
Mm-hmm.
like a life with Vision, kids, everything. So he first just kind of soothes her with like, okay, it's fine. I see what you're doing. I get it. Um, and he starts asking like, how did you do this? And we find out that Wanda doesn't even really know how this happened, right? So we know that she has control of Westview for the most part, but she doesn't really know how it was created at this point. And so with I think this episode ends with us figuring out that Pietro's just kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
fake, right? Because he makes the comment that like, oh, it's not like your dead husband can die twice. The kids obviously hear it. She like knocks him out, and then the globe expands, right?
Do we
And
know? Do we know that just because, say, at this point, before the rest of the season comes out, we don't know that just because she has another moment to where she has a glimpse of him with bullet holes. It's like a dead Pietro. So from here in this
yeah,
moment, I'm over here just like, okay, maybe they couldn't get whatever his name. It's like Aaron Taylor, whatever that
yeah,
guy is.
yeah.
Like, okay, so now sub in Evan Peters, and maybe this is Pietro. And throughout this whole episode, it's not like he's been a nice guy. He's a wise guy. He's an asshole. And when it comes down to him saying that line, oh, it's not like we can kill your husband twice, your dead husband twice. That was something expected coming from him. And
Like not out of character for what we've seen for
right,
his character thus far, is what you're saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I
I
wouldn't
guess
have
I'm in
said,
a
I wouldn't have known him to be quote unquote fake at this point.
Right. I think you know what I'm doing. I think I'm inferring because at the start of the next episode, like this is where you could visibly see Wanda is like depressed at this point,
Hmm.
and the boys are asking about Pietro, and he's just like that is not your uncle. Like so, I guess I'm inferring having obviously now seen the episode that follows, and that still is before Agatha reveals that Pietro was sent by her to try and get more information. So I think what I'm doing is I'm using that now information to then be like, okay, I think at this point she senses that he's not who he says he
Hmm.
is. But you're right. At that point, I feel like it wasn't certain, especially based on like how his behavior was being displayed. But the very evident thing is that this is not the same
Right.
brother, and she's kind of questioned it for sure throughout this particular episode because there is a scene where she's asking or she's being like, "Oh, do you remember this?" And it seems kind of like a fake like memory that she's trying to see if he remembers to kind of test to see. And I think he even calls her out like, "Oh, you're testing me to see if I'm really your
Correct.
brother."
Hmm.
So yes, but you're right. At this point, like at least us as audiences aren't certain if like she's aware that this is a fake Pietro at this
Correct.
point. So for sure.
One thing that I liked about this episode that I'm going to kind of fast forward into episode 7, which is called Breaking the Fourth Wall. When it comes down to breaking the fourth wall, we actually get that in this episode 6 because this episode it comes off like I remember watching the show Malcolm in the Middle, and then come to find out later on, Wanda was watching Malcolm in the Middle, and
Hmm.
kind of got this reference from here. And at the beginning of this episode, we see either Tommy or Billy talking to the camera like Malcolm used to here. So in actuality, they already kind of broke that fourth wall by talking to the camera. And now, fast forward into episode 7 because episode 6 was, I'm going to say, like the 90s sitcom take to where now,
Like early
right,
2000s. Yeah,
right.
like
And
yeah.
now, episode 7, now we're here in the 2000s to where this is more so looking like Modern Family, like that type of show where they're
Or even like yeah, or like a what's this term, mockumentary, because even the intro of episode 7, the theme song is very similar to the Office theme song. Like if
right.
you hummed it, you would sound like you're humming the Office theme song
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Before we dive into episode 7, there's a couple things I wanted to
oh,
point out
go
from
ahead.
the
Yeah,
previous
yeah. My bad.
episode for the
I
Halloween
jumped the
one.
gun. My bad.
No, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Going back to just the idea of like these characters kind of paying homage to their original costume designs from the
Mm-hmm.
comics. At this point in the episode, we don't know that Agatha is actually, or I'm sorry, Agnes is actually Agatha
Mm-hmm.
Harkness. It's kind of been assumed, but it hasn't been confirmed. With like the image of the pendant and like certain things that have been lining up, there's a lot of things kind of pointing to
Right.
that. Even the bunny that we meet earlier in the series, like her pet, his name is what's his name, Mr. Scratch or something like
I
that, which
can't
seems to
remember.
be
Yeah.
a yeah, I think it's like Senor Scratchy, something like that, which seems to be a reference to Agatha's son in the comics, Nicholas Scratch.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that have been pointing, but nothing confirmed. And this episode, the fact that she's dressed up as a witch kind of, nudged on that even further. Um, what still is yet to be determined at this point is she a friend, is she a foe? It's really hard to say. She's really just played the role of the friend at this point. But we see this episode, this scene where she's kind of setting up, um, what's the word, or just dropping a lot of bombs on Vision,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because Vision is obviously unaware of his life outside of the hex, which is one of the things that has frustrated
Right.
him. He's like, I don't have a memory before Westview, and she kind of throws these things like, "Oh, Avengers." He has no awareness of the
Right.
Avengers, and then she's like, "Am I dead?" And he's like, "No, why would you think that?"
Because
And she's
you
like,
are.
"Because you're
Right.
dead." Yeah, like that. These are some pretty heavy things, and so that's kind of like the last couple things I wanted to drop on this particular episode. And now segueing into episode
Mm-hmm.
7. Darcy is now inside of the hex, and she's kind of answering some questions for Vision. Um, and I really like this episode because I think it really highlights the pain that Wanda is going through, because I think at this point it's not easy to feel empathetic for her just yet, because you're like, whoa, like she's doing this to the people. You obviously see how terrifying this can be for them, and she's doing it
Right.
knowingly. And this episode kind of allows you to empathize a little bit with what she's going through because, you know, not only did she see Vision die, like she had to kill him first, which was devastating for her in Infinity
Mm-hmm.
War, and then watch someone reanimate him just to kill him
Right.
again. And we're, you know, in this particular episode, we also see just like the pain that she goes through coming back from the blip and trying to find out where Vision is. Obviously, you know, this has been 5 years since the events of Infinity War. He's been
Mm-hmm.
dismantled by the organization of Swords. So not only do we get an idea of just the pain that she's in, the fact that she's really in the middle of her grieving process. This is 2 weeks for her since she's lost like the love of her
Right.
life. Um, and I think one of the, and I believe a Century reference as well. It's one of the comic runs where we are introduced to the White Vision. But before that, you see there's an image of her, of a Vision like completely dismantled that resembles very similar to what
Right.
we see in this particular
Hold
episode.
on. I think we
Well,
sent
I'm so
that
sorry.
for
Next,
episode
yeah,
8,
for the
but I
following
do wanna. I'm
episode.
gonna bring
Just
that. I'm gonna bring
kidding.
that image up anyway, of like the comic book
Yeah.
version of Wanda looking at a dismantled Vision.
Yeah, so you're right. I'm kind of getting in my head myself. So that is a very good parallel to what we see in episode 8, where she's like hovering over Vision and she says the line, "I can't feel you."
Mm-hmm.
I broke watching this episode for the first time. Because if you were like me who followed their love story
Mm-hmm.
previously, you know, that's something that
That's their line.
they
That's
kind, you
their
know, I think
tagline.
that's their
Yeah. Yeah.
line.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, when she, I think it's in Civil War when she's like, and what do you feel, right? Because she's going through the grief of having been like the cause of really the Accords and all of that, and Vision says like, "I only feel you." And then, you know, so it's just, and then also in the start of Infinity War when they're showing this moment before everything kind of, you know, goes bad,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, "Oh, like I'm trying to decipher, am I the stone, is it me?" And then she's like, "I just feel you." So this is such a heartbreaking
Oh,
moment, and
he
I think
says
it
that
just
again, like
brings
right
back
when she's about to
in Infinity
destroy
War.
the stone. So like
Yes, I only feel
that is
you're
their
really trying to
line.
get me to cry on screen. Yeah, so I think this brings back that empathy that I think we could have lost at this point for Wanda,
Mm-hmm.
because she has been pretty much set up to be the villain of this entire series by this
Yeah.
point. So that's why I think the episode 7 is pretty crucial in kind of setting that up and kind of turning it back to get that empathy for her. So yeah.
But this episode ends. I'm gonna throw up that image of the comic book cover of Scarlet Witch with Agatha on the cover because it was quote unquote Agatha all along, you know?
Agatha all along. Yes.
So,
I thought that was a cool comic to kind of throw up for this because, yeah, like you said, this is at the very end we realize it's been Agatha.
mm-hmm.
She seems to be, you know, I wouldn't say the big bad. I feel like she shares that role with Wanda a little bit, but definitely she's kind of pulling some strings in a negative way. So thought that was a good picture to add
But
on
say
there.
in that moment I I know the internet throughout the whole entire season up to this point was like, oh, that's Agatha. It's not Agnes. It's Agatha. But there were no signs of this being Agatha. This has primarily been like, I won't even say WandaVision. This has been like the Wanda show. This has been more so, okay, it's Wanda behind the scenes pulling strings, and then once we get this Agatha all along little montage or theme song, even everything that was shown in this sequence, uh, the only thing that I could have been like, oh, that makes sense was the uh, appearance of Pietro. Okay, because
Hmm.
that was the only instance to where Wanda wasn't in control. She didn't know who he was until he was like, "You don't recognize your brother or whatnot." So when
Hmm.
that came into play, I was like, "Okay, so this was Agatha." Because now thinking back into Halloween, and now you think about how Quicksilver, he's kind of pushing these questions, and he's not. Now you're thinking is he's not asking for himself, but he's more so asking for Agatha to kind of like relay that
Yes.
information as far as how Wanda has her powers, how she's doing everything, and how she's controlling the whole city of Westview.
Absolutely. And then I think those were all my notes that I had for episode 7. So we can kind of dive into episode
Okay.
8 unless
No,
you
no,
had
go
anything
ahead.
extra you want to
Go
kind of
ahead.
drop off. Okay. So moving into episode 8, this is the episode where we're getting, all the flashbacks to kind of pin together how did we get to this moment. And at this point, like Agatha has the
Mm-hmm.
boys in like her grasp, if
Let's
you
call
will.
it a
So she's
dungeon.
definitely being,
Somewhere in her dungeon.
it's a
Yeah. Yeah.
dungeon. Yes. Yes. And so she is like very frustrated at the fact that, she's explaining that witchcraft is this very well crafted art that takes a very long time to refine those skills, to perfect your spells. And she's like, she's honestly just hating
Yeah.
that Wanda was able to do so much magic on
Mm-hmm.
autopilot, using her words,
Mm-hmm.
autopilot, with ease and with such like unawareness of really what she's doing. Because really, Wanda doesn't even understand how she was able to create what she's
Right.
creating or even control what she's controlling at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So just as much as Agatha's trying to figure out how the hell are you able to do this, just almost like she's like, I am
Oh
disrespected.
yeah, definitely. Because
um,
like, say, uh, at the beginning of this episode, we get an idea that Agatha, she is actually, uh, let's say, from the times of Salem, and I don't know if that's the 16th or 15th century. So Agatha, she is, uh, we put it out there that she is a witch that now she's an older, maybe the oldest person that we know of right now in the MCU. She's a few hundred years old, and uh, out of nowhere, Wanda creates this. I don't want to say this city, but this reality in this city. So I feel like Agnes. I'm gonna take side Agnes here, where I feel like she has a right to
how
hate.
dare
She
you?
has a right to be like, yo, I've been here for a few hundred years now. What are you doing here? How did you get all this power? And
How
I've
dare
been
you?
practicing
Yeah.
witchcraft. Like I have a book on witchcraft right here in my dungeon, and right now you're just doing what the book is telling you without even casting anything. So tell me your secrets, and like she's just trying to
Die.
figure it out, you know?
No, she is like understandably upset, right? Because like just to even add even more perspective to this, like yes, like at the introduction of this particular episode, we see a flashback of again, I don't remember the year either, but Salem witchcraft
Right.
because that's kind of what it or Salem witch trials essentially because
Mm-hmm.
that's like the time frame that they're trying to align this
Right.
with, and in the comics, Agatha is one of the original witches that were kind of like in the events of, the Salem witch trials, but she actually predates those events. So I think honestly, like her, in terms of how old she is, I think it's closer to like thousands of
Oh
years
wow.
old. I think, something like that. I don't know in particular, but she's been around for a long time, refining her skills,
Mm-hmm.
and then comes Wanda, who doesn't even know the basics. How she's just like how dare you? Like
Mm-hmm.
literally at that first intro, and now she's like, all right, guess we're gonna have to do this the hard way. And she's like, I'm gonna make you relive every moment of trauma you've
Right.
ever had until we find out how the hell did this
Yeah. No,
happen.
like let me
Yeah.
find out the key, and if I can do this, like we're just gonna take you through everything just so I can see what happened. And in this whole sequence, just to kind of, if you could help me fill in the gaps here, um, say was she was because I know uh, Agatha initially in the last episode said that the Scarlet Witch is not, they're not born, they're forged. But say, was Wanda and the let's say from the missiles killing her fam, that wasn't the catalyst of her powers. It was more so the Mind Stone, right?
Okay, so the way that they're framing her powers, because up until all of this, we have assumed that her powers were birthed from the Mind Stone. Done.
Mm-hmm.
That there was no such like things as her having powers prior. These flashbacks are setting up essentially the idea that she is like a mutant, but not saying a mutant, but kind of honing it a little bit closer to just the fact that she is the Scarlet
Mm-hmm.
Witch, you know? So I think that's kind of their way of merging together, almost what's the term? Like uh I'll think of it later, but they're essentially kind of going back and being like, actually, she was always a mutant, but she always had these abilities, but the Mind Stone helped unlock them into something that's much
Right.
greater. There's like that particular scene where it's kind of like right in the middle of her being experimented on by
Mm-hmm.
Strucker, and the Mind Stone's there, and you see kind of like a silhouette of what we are going to see her become, which is truly the Scarlet
Mm-hmm.
Witch. So I think they've decided to kind of just vamp up the title of the Scarlet Witch, make it like almost like a separate entity, kind of similar to like how I keep thinking Dark Phoenix. Like I feel like they set it up very similar to kind of like the idea of like Dark Phoenix. They're both Nexus beings as well. So I feel like their stories are very
Mm-hmm.
similar. And I think they're just kind of like pulling little pieces to kind of retcon, that's the word I was looking for, to retcon what they already established and what we had already known. So it's a little bit truer to the comics, but still not like a full rewash, because obviously something we expect with the MCU is consistency. The continuity has been very well done thus
Right.
far, and I think they didn't want to be like actually like so I think they were walking that fine line, and I did like the way that they did it, because they made it much truer to what it is in the comics. In the comics, she's just a mutant whose powers resemble that of a witch. And so when she meets Agatha Harkness, she becomes her mentor, and she really dives into the world of witchcraft, but her base is a
Right.
mutant who just
I
mimics.
mean
Yeah.
that makes sense. And just kind of thinking back into the MCU, as far as the history of the Mind Stone that we know of before Vision, pre Vision, we know it to quote unquote, I won't say control, do mind control, like control someone's mind, but let's say unlock someone's mind to do whatever it wants. Now, um, when we see Wanda come into this room with the scepter, it's more so the stone reacts to her and starts to
Mhm.
vibrate. And of course, Strucker and his team, they don't see that, but I'm going to presume that the stone sees her, reacts to her, understands what she is, and she may not know it at this point, but it pretty
Mhm.
much unlocks her mind to her potential of being the quote unquote silhouette of this Scarlet Witch, and unlocks her mind to kind of uh, if she is a quote unquote mutant, then it unlocks her mind to be aware of these powers that she may already have that she is totally unaware of. And that may be the same case for Pietro, because it was the same thing for him, to where it more so, I guess, unlocked him to have super speed, you know? So I feel
Mhm.
like what we saw in that sequence as far as the Mind Stone, it kind of still goes, it's still on track to what it has been in the MCU sacred timeline.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the way that they did it, and I think that was really well said. I think I agree with all of that. I think the way they did it, they were able to retcon some things, but in a way where it just further explained what happened in a way that we didn't understand it before.
Mm-hmm.
Like we assumed it was like the other way around, that the Mind Stone gave them these abilities,
Mm-hmm.
when in actuality it just seemed to unlock and enhance those abilities. And I assume it's the same with Pietro, much like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, but in the case of Wanda, her abilities were just much grander. And in the particular flashback scene where you're seeing her watch like a sitcom, you see the trunk with all of the shows that she seemed to just really love as a
Mm-hmm.
kid. This shows that essentially the themes or like the cinematography that her subconscious created for this reality was very much, attuned to the things that were very comforting for her as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
That beautiful family scene is very soon destroyed by like the incoming missile that just kind of that kills her parents, but somehow doesn't kill her or her brother, right? Because there's that one missile that lands right in front of them. They reference the scene very much to a T back in Age of Ultron,
Mhm.
and they're saved. But it's giving the perspective of like, actually what happened was your powers were coming into play, because that is one of her powers, is like the power to basically manipulate probability. And what that means is like, she has the ability to like move objects, create certain things. So it's kind of like, what is the probability of X
Right.
happening? Whatever small probability that is, she's able to make that probability a reality. And that's essentially how all of this has come
Yeah.
about.
Okay. Did I have anything else for episode 8? No. I think I want to dive straight into episode 9 if that's cool.
Let's do
All
it.
right.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hold on. Episode 9 is the series finale, and oh, episode 8 does end with. Actually, doesn't end
Oh, that's
like,
right.
yeah. There's like a post credit scene of the White Vision. We are introduced to the White Vision, and at this point, this is where we find out that Hayward actually has the real Vision, and come to find out that the Vision that we know of in this series is the fake Vision, or a fake Vision. But here is White Vision now. He doesn't have a stone. He has just, uh, I guess, I don't know, a CPU in place of that, to where
Mm-hmm.
this is now controlled by a sword. And now we're going to go into episode 9.
And before we get into just like the meat of episode 9, I'd like to give just kind of a little bit of a background on the White
Okay.
Vision, um, because obviously this series is a beautiful like culmination of like all of these different comics. And I think once you see it for what it is, I think it's done so well. In the middle of watching it is frustrating, but I really like how they did it. So in the comics, White Vision is basically Vision without Wonder Man's
Yeah.
brainwaves, which basically takes away his humanness and leaves him to just be kind of what we see here, just like an android,
Mm-hmm.
not no real emotion, no connection to Wanda as a person, like just very robotic. And this is something I particularly want to highlight to those that like kind of refer to our Vision as just an android, or like is even capable of real emotion. Like, yeah, he is, because the opposite is this guy, White Vision, with absolutely no memories, well, absolutely no like uh humanness
Well,
to
let's
him.
let's
And in the comics, that's
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, let's add to that, because say the Vision that we know of, you spoke of in the past, is a combination of the Mind Stone, Doctor Banner, and Tony Stark.
Thank
So
you. Yeah.
all those three, that's where we're going to get let's say the quote unquote personality, because even the Mind Stone in itself is a personality of its own. So
Yes. Yes.
when it comes down to it, that is how we get the Vision, especially from Jump, when it's birthed from the cradle. He's not talking robotic. He's talking like Jarvis. He's talking with a personality, more so trying to understand what is going on with the world and Ultron at that moment. And now we get this White Vision, he sounds like a computer program. He's like, I'm
Mhm.
here to take out Vision. Like, I can't get the robotic voice, but all in all, when it comes down to it, it sounds like a robot. It sounds like an android, and this is the best that Hayward could have came up with. I hated it. I
Yeah.
hated it all. you know.
um I think it's very in tune with I still think it's very in tune with how we see it in the comics. I think instead of, Vision but missing the Wonder Man's brain waves, making him just kind of an android. In this case, it's like it's the memories that the Vision we've seen thus
Mm-hmm.
far, who's actually like physically not
Mm-hmm.
real, because he is like the memories and the love that like Wanda has had for
Mm-hmm.
Vision. He is our true Vision, like in its
Yeah.
core. You know what I mean? And those are the components that are missing from White Vision, and they're basically like a symbol, I guess, of like what Wonder Man's brainwaves would have been in the comics, or are in the
Right.
comics. So I think it's a really good adaptation where it's like they're keeping the core elements, but obviously fitting it to what we've known thus far in the MCU. So let's continue.
Yeah.
Now we're getting into the events of episode 9, the
The
finale.
finale. So, say when it comes down to the let's say the bread and butter, because we have two things here. We got the battle of the visions, and we get the battle of the witches. Okay, and when it comes down to the battle of the witches, the one thing that got me the most excited for phase four and moving forward is Agatha. There was a moment to where she's in the city and she refers to the Darkhold as the Book of the Damned. Now, we already know that the Darkhold is a book of magic. If you all didn't connect the dots, the Darkhold, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna connect the dots and say it was one of the missing books from Doctor Strange's library, the Sorcerer Supreme's library or whatnot. You will see there is a hole missing, and the Darkhold is one of the books to fill that hole. But say when it comes down to the dark magic, Grace has already mentioned it, to where vampires, they are from the Darkhold's magic. Now, I'm gonna go off course just for a second because we just got the trailer for, or another trailer for Morbius this week,
But yes,
and this is now intro of vampires, of the quote unquote bite of the bat, to where now I'm curious to see where this is going to play in the MCU, because we can already, or I don't know if we can assume, but Sony, you got to connect it. You've already done it with Venom, so you might as
you have to
well
play
just
nice.
go ahead and throw Morbius in there. But I do want to know if uh, Morbius's power is from the Darkhold, and we already have had a reference
Yeah.
from Loki as far as vampires, so it's coming. So the fact that Agatha refers to it as the Book of the Damned, I'm just like, okay, this book, especially from what we see at the very end with Wanda reading the book, I was like, okay, she is going to unlock all the darkness
Hmm.
in the MCU, not just like the stuff that we've seen, but now we're gonna get some demons. We are gonna get some like vampire type situation. So
It's almost like Pandora's
right,
box in a
right,
sense, right? Like it's gonna be unleashed, and whether Morbius gets introduced to the MCU and connected to all of this mayhem or not, we know it's
right,
coming in some shape or form. Blade is a confirmed film as well, and I feel like, I mean, he's,
yeah,
it's all
right.
connected. So for sure, this is definitely setting up all to come. And before we get into like because I know you mentioned a little bit of like that end scene with Wanda reading the dark holds, because I feel like that all adds and holds so much weight in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself. Um, the We can kind of break down the battle of like Wanda versus
Mm-hmm.
Agatha. Something that I thought was kind of cool in the way that it was set up is that, like I said, I've mentioned before, um, Wanda and, or I'm sorry, Agatha is somewhat of like a mentor to Wanda, right? They have that like apprenticeship type of
Correct.
relationship. And inadvertently, I feel like they kind of played that same role in this case,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because ultimately, Wanda is able to outsmart Agatha using her same, like the very basic spell, the same one that we see her use in earlier
Right.
episodes, to kind of,
With the runes.
the witch who casts the ruins is the only one who could, cast the magic in that particular
Mm-hmm.
space. And so she kind of ended up still playing that role, and I thought that was really well done. And along with her just continuing her education as like a witch, a sorceress, all of that, reading the Darkhold at the end, she got that book from Agatha. So I feel like it still continues the idea that Agatha um, played that role of like a mentor for
Right.
her. And I know we're going to see her come up again. Like, this is not the last we've seen of Agatha for
Well, even
sure.
in episode 8, we didn't really get her to be a quote unquote villain. It was just more so like a witch consulting a witch to see how this other witch got her powers. So it was never really on
Mhm.
some like she's legit the bad guy until episode 9, to where she actually like,
Yeah.
okay, now I see how you got it and I'm about to take that.
hmm And we get a little bit of a somewhat of a sneak peek for what's about to happen in one of the commercials. So we haven't talked about the commercials yet. The commercials are actually pretty big with almost every episode had a commercial, and the commercials were essentially like a condensed form of a piece of Wanda's
Mm-hmm.
subconscious. A lot of it are things that she just wasn't able to process. Like I think the very first one is a direct like reference to Stark Industries, so referencing obviously like the bombs,
Right.
all of that. But there's a particular one, and I made a little note. Let me pull it up just so I can get it correct. But okay, it's in episode 6. It's for Yo Magic Yogurt, and
That
we
was a
see this
dark
boy who's like
commercial.
starving on a
I
huh?
said,
That
yeah,
was that was the darkest
right,
one. Like that was the darkest one. It was very
right.
disturbing. There's this boy on an island. He's like hungry. The shark comes and gives him like yo magic, and he's trying to eat it, and you just slowly see him like withering away. So I feel like it's such a parallel to what Mephisto essentially does in the comics, which is like he reabsorbs Wanda's
Mm-hmm.
children and absorbs their magic and wants to take Wanda's magic. And that's kind of what I thought all of this was leading up to. We obviously, I was like at this point, I'm like, if we haven't seen him in episode 8, he's not
Right,
coming in
right.
episode
It's
9.
over. Yeah.
But yeah, and then in episode 9, that's kind of what Agatha ends up trying to do with Wanda.
Yeah, and one commercial I don't know that just stuck out to me that I kind of liked. It was the paper towel one called Lagos, and
Lagos.
it's like for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
mistakes that you accidentally make. And I was like, damn, that kind of touched on when because that was Wanda. Was that Lagos with Wanda? Where she actually
Lagos is where she accidentally killed I don't know how many people in an attempt
stopped.
to take
Right,
away
right,
that
exactly.
bomb that
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that's essentially like the catalyst for the Sokovia
Right,
Accords as well.
exactly.
So I'm sure that's a huge guilt for her because that, you know, basically set up Earth to be vulnerable for the events of Infinity War to even
Mm-hmm.
happen. And so obviously, like it adds to how like these commercials were definitely little pieces of her, like of things that she just never processed, traumas that she kind of was
Correct.
still holding on to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And and the last thing, oh, not the last thing. One thing I want to add, as far as uh, one other thing Agatha mentioned to her, saying uh, that the power of the Scarlet Witch exceeds that of the Sorcerer Supreme. Now,
The Sorcerer Supreme.
we already know who the Sorcerer Supreme is, and I won't even put Doctor Strange into that conversation yet because Doctor Strange, I would say, is still fairly new to his abilities, is still learning. But the power of the Scarlet Witch, let's say, surpasses the power of the original Sorcerer Supreme because she already
Mm-hmm.
seemed like a badass in itself, and um, the the way that she passed, it was unfortunate, but she already saw that coming, and
Yep. Yep.
of that, if anything, if there was like a hypothetical showdown, I would have loved to seen her versus uh, Wanda just to see what that would have been like.
Yeah. And see, I guess at this point we can bring Doctor Strange into that
Mm-hmm.
conversation because he is the
Mm-hmm.
Sorcerer Supreme. We know that that they're gonna clash to some effect in Multiverse of Madness. We know Wanda plays a huge role in that movie, and I think a lot of us are assuming, and this is kind of my assumption too, that that's gonna play out very. I saw some things that confirmed that I believe it's like a few years for sure from the events of WandaVision that Multiverse of Madness takes place, which I like because that means it's even if it was 3 months of her studying in the
Mm-hmm.
Darkhold, I feel like that would change her level of power drastically. So if you even take just a handful of years of
Mm-hmm.
studying this type of magic with what we already know her abilities to be, I feel like it's just bringing the stakes up higher to something completely like different. So I obviously this episode ends with or the series ends with Wanda sitting in the
Mm-hmm.
Darkhold in the
Mm-hmm.
cabin. And then you hear the voices of her
Mm-hmm.
kids. Because, at the end of this episode, I feel like I'm glazing over it because it's like too hard to talk about that end scene where she says goodbye to Vision, and Vision's like, "What if I wasn't the real Vision? Like, what was I?" And then she's like, "You're my love." Oh, just can't. It can't. But anyway, I'm purposely skipping over that because I don't
It's
think I can
fine. It's all
get
good.
through
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um, and or even like the line of like, "What is grief if not love?" Like,
Right.
oh, it's just too good. But so like she basically gives up everything she's ever
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do what is the right
Right.
thing and release all these people of like the prison that she's created. And so she puts her kids she puts her kids to sleep and just says goodnight, and they disappear, which is like heartbreaking because like Monica said earlier in the series, like these are her children. Like they're not fake. Like those are really her
Right.
children. They just do not exist outside of this
Mm-hmm.
reality. And so you can imagine that not only is Wanda like studying for the sake of just being able to fulfill her role as the Scarlet Witch, it seems like that role is very ominous. The way that Agatha kind of brought up, like, oh, you will be the end of like the world or something like
Yeah.
that. So I'm sure she's trying to understand her powers in a way that she can hopefully do good, etc. But also, I'm pretty sure to find a way to bring back her kids.
Well,
So
say with that being said, because yes, the series ends with her in isolation, and she is reading the Darkhold. Right now, she has already, uh, like I just mentioned, she's aware of the quote unquote Sorcerer Supreme just because Agatha mentioned that. Now, with that being said, um, and her knowing that the Darkhold is called quote unquote the Book of the Damned, she knows that she is studying dark magic. Now,
mhm.
if there were the possibility, I feel like she would be open to go to wherever Strange is in on Bleecker Street and get a better idea as far as how to get to this reality through a different source of magic. It doesn't necessarily have to be through the Darkhold, but I won't say that she's ignorant to that fact. I'm just saying that if it came down to her choice selection, she's choosing to kind of go to the dark side. She's choosing to go and read through this dark magic because initially she's reading this magic with not even without even hearing the voices. This is her choice. She's choosing to read
Mhm.
this dark magic when at the end of the day, if I just found out that I'm a quote unquote witch or a sorcerer, I would try to find, I don't want to say other people like me, but being that I just met Agatha, I would want to see if there's anything else for me to learn outside of dark because yeah, she is an Avenger. Okay, she's already established herself to be a quote unquote hero, and Agatha kind of questioned that like, how can you be a hero if you're controlling all these people at the same time? So, um, right now I feel like she is more so getting more comfortable with the fact that she is not a hero. She may, in actuality, be a villain. Let's say a villain because I think Hayward pointed it out. It's like she did this, she did that, then became an Avenger, but now she's controlling the whole town. So by the end of this series, I can't say Wanda is a good person. We don't know where she's at.
I think, and let me know if you can hear me because
I
my
can hear you.
headphones
I can hear
died.
you.
So can
Yeah,
you hear me
totally fine.
okay? Okay. So just kind of on that note, because I know like particularly the scene that you're referring to, it's that scene where he is like trying to set her up to look like a villain. Obviously, if you look at the facts just like
Right.
point blank, yeah, like she's done some pretty crazy stuff. Like but in the words of Captain America, right? Like, not in the words, but like kind of where yeah,
Right.
you know what I'm gonna say. But because I think it's Maria Hill who's like very, very much doing what Haywood did and just kind of like point blank lining up the things that she's
Mm-hmm.
done. She volunteered for experimentation, but all of that to like fight
the
Right.
Avengers, all these
Right.
things. And he's like, oh yeah, like what person would like volunteer for a German scientist to do experimentation on them for the good of their country? And then he's like, oh well, we're not at war, Captain, but they are, you know. So I think if you look at her actions and you compare them to say other characters, like I'm sure to like the Nazi Germany, like, you know, people that were in Captain America's time would look at Captain America and be like, he's our villain if you're looking at that
Mm-hmm.
perspective, right? Wanda was, you know, only really saw the negative sides of Shield, and so for them Shield was the enemy. They're doing this to protect their country and their people and do good from what they think is the
Mm-hmm.
case, right? Similar to how, like, you know, the Avengers fight off other people because they think they're doing good, right? And so I feel like her actions, I don't want to say are justified, but I don't think they're coming from a perspective of someone who's like, I am doing this to purposely do evil to hurt people. Like her intention was to help her
Right.
people because she saw the destruction that Shield, Stark, all that had caused for her. And I think it's in Civil War. Quicksilver's the one who's like, oh, so this is Shield.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, when the Shield is like loading people up on the
Mm-hmm.
helicarriers to help get people off the Sokovia before it gets, you know, like thrown out. And that's when she switches sides because she recognizes like, okay, I was on the wrong side in this particular case, and I can probably do better being with the Avengers. And I think at this point, like, you know, like what is a hero? I think it's a person who puts like their own needs or the needs of others above the needs of their
Mm-hmm.
own. So very similar to what Cap has done up until the moment that he went back into the past and stayed with Peggy, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing, you know? And I think this is kind of where her road is leading. It's like I've lost a lot. Like being a hero hasn't gotten her very
Mm-hmm.
much. Like she's lost the love of her life being a hero because, you know, like I think she did the right thing to release these people from their prison that she put them
Mm-hmm.
in, but she didn't have to. Like she did not have to. She could have kept it where it was and be like, you know what? F all of
Right.
you. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, keep the life that I want. But she came to a point of like, I can't justify this
Correct.
myself. You know what I mean? I think she's human. I think that's what it is. Because honestly, like, I'd like to think I'm a good person, but I would have done what she did, and I'd probably still be learning from the dark hold. And I think part of her intention with continue that education is like, yes, one is seeing what her abilities as the Scarlet Witch
Mm-hmm.
entail, but also it's like to find how she can maybe get back to having her kids and things like that. Because we know Wiccan and Speed are going to come back. It seems like they're setting up like the Young Avengers
Mm-hmm.
storyline with, you know, what's her name? Who's the new Hawkeye?
I can't tell you. I have to wait until the series drops later
You
this month.
failed me. But we know that those two are going to come back. So I feel like, I don't know. Obviously, I am defensive, you
Yeah.
know. Like you're not wrong. Like I wouldn't see her, I feel like I would align her more as an
Mm-hmm.
anti-hero at this point. Like I wouldn't necessarily call her a villain, but she's no longer putting the needs of everyone else above her own, you know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
She's
But
being,
see,
she's a flawed character, she's
but
human,
see,
she's picking a
in
selfish
that
path, yeah.
logic though, she is now going to, being that she's heard the voice of her children, she is going to find some type of magic to somehow bend reality to get her kids, because at the end of the day, uh, these kids, again, they're not real. These are a quote unquote figment of her imagination, right? And now that you're saying that she's not putting the needs of others, she's now so putting the needs of herself. In doing this, and especially in the way that she's going and the magic that she's studying, uh, you know that there's nothing good that can come of this, because she's gonna go by any means to get her kids, because she's a mom, and I get it. The love of a mom for her kids, I understand that, because my mom loves me, your mom loves you, I get that. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to the route that she's going to take, this is where, uh, I don't want to say Strange. What's the other gentleman, the other Benedict's name in Doctor Strange, the Asian guy?
Wong.
Wong, exactly. This is where Wong would have set guidelines like, hey, yo, if he knew Wanda, he'd be like, I'm sorry, this is the rules of magic, and you can't do that, you know? So,
Yes.
yeah, I'm curious just to see where this goes, especially in the multiverse of madness.
100%. And I just want to finish with
Right.
this when it comes to like the mention of their kids, like, and I'm using some straight from the series, like Monica said it, like, no, her kids are real. Like, they're not fake. Like, they are very much real. What they're made of, I don't know, but like, they obviously had, and I think this was just highlighted also by the fact that they didn't mold or yield to what she wanted them to do because they're their own individuals. So I think that very clearly outlines that however they were created, they are real. They're no longer in this reality. They're no longer in this existence. And I think she's going to be using the Darkhold to maybe pull them from other multiverse. And maybe that's how Multiverse of Madness kind of like carries into it. But for sure, we're going to see Wanda be played out to be the villain, at least at the start of the film of Multiverse of Madness. And I think at some point things are going to turn where, you know, their objectives align and they come together to take down the big bad, which I think has been softly confirmed as Shuma Gorath, the tentacled creature we saw come out, I think 2 or 3 times in the What If series. So just a little plug there.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm excited as well. So many good things coming.
So right now, this is all that I have of the WandaVision series, but there are a few topics that I do want to talk about on here, maybe at a later date, maybe like a part 2 to this, because this was a lot to cover. But say when it comes down to especially what you just mentioned as far as confirmed villains in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, I do want to talk about Wanda being a villain. I do want to talk about, if anything, if Shuma Gorath is confirmed. I want to talk about that, and also let's talk about Kang, because all 3 of these people now we're diving into the multiverse, and these are all somewhat connected as far as being now multiversal beings, and I want to talk about the quote unquote multiversal heroes as well, and I want to put Monica Rambeau into that category, just because as far as how she got her powers going in and out of the hex, this is I guess confirmed of her quote unquote mutation of going in and out of a reality, you know, and I would put her in the conversation of being a multiversal hero, but just for the sake of time, I would love to continue to talk about that on a later date.
Oh, absolutely. And I think especially since we just finished recapping WandaVision, that was a big task. High five, my friend, because that's a lot. We went through a whole series in this one episode. This is obviously a very extended one, but thank you for those of you guys who have been tuning in with us. And now that we've really gone over a lot of big things from the beginning of this phase, I think it would be a great time to do like an additional episode where we kind of bring together and theorize on how this is going to come about in future things coming up. So for sure, I'm so down.
When we did the Venom and What If recap, I named that Multiverse of Madness Part 1. So I would love to have a Part 2, and let's chat about that. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect. So keep a lookout for that, you guys. We're really excited to dive into so many things coming out. Like, this is a good time.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all again for tuning in. I know this is a little longer. Like, we actually covered, normally we talk about a handful of episodes, but we talked about episodes 1 through 9 here of WandaVision. So this was a longer episode than usual, but we did cover a lot. And yeah, like Grace said, this was a great episode. So tune in. When did we discuss when are we on next? Are we on 2 weeks from now, or I forgot the calendar. I don't have my notes.
We will be on. We're sticking to like that two every other week schedule. I think the particular day is going to be a little different.
Monday,
so just stay tuned with that, because obviously holidays.
Yeah. So I will post the date on our new Instagram. Again, check us out on the Comic Cinematic Universe. And yeah, that is everything that I got for you all. So you all have a great weekend. Grace, you have a great weekend. And yeah, we will catch y'all later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.